So I wanted to talk a little bit in the second half of this lecture about mindfulness research, and what you will see are just the tremendous number of benefits that come from mindfulness meditation. Some of these studies are very old. You can see Langer and Roden in 1976. Some of these will be much more current. What I find really fascinating is sort of how each of these studies, and if you watch the optional video where Ellen Langer is actually talking about her sort of 40 years of research, what you find is that it seems like anytime you make a person mindful, there's some sort of benefit. So mindfulness research has shown that older adults actually feel happier and live longer, really in two situations. One, when they actually are given sort of a pep talk so they make their own decisions, and when they are actually required to take care of a houseplant. So they Langer and Roden went into this residential care facility, gave each person a pep talk about making their own decisions, and gave them a houseplant. And what they found was that 18 months later, those who were in the treatment group, those who were actually encouraged to make their own choices, half as many of them had actually died, and that's remarkable. Brown and Ryan, coming from self-determination theory, found that increased mindfulness was related to less mood disturbances and stressors for cancer patients. Shapiro found that in pre-med students that the effectiveness of a mindful meditation for these pre-med and medical students was that they experienced increased levels of empathy and decreased levels of anxiety and depression by just being in a mindfulness meditation group. Hospital patients, John Kabat-Zinn, found that there were improvements in both hardiness and coherence over the course of an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course. Adolescents with psychiatric diagnoses compared to control groups have been shown to have fewer depressive symptoms and less anxiety, increased quality of sleep, greater positive feelings about themselves. And in many ways, again, Langer has a great quote in her optional video that I'm going to post, where she talks about how it seems as though there's just almost nothing that mindfulness-based stress reduction won't improve. It reduces the frequency of relapse of depression. It decreases depressive symptoms in bipolar individuals. It decreases symptoms of social phobia, increases openness and trust and caring and motivation to be part of something bigger than ourselves. So it's this incredible 40 years of research that really shows how focusing on the present moment in a non-judgmental way has incredible benefits for our health and well-being. So the last 2/3 of this part of the lecture, I really want to talk about Csikszentmihalyi. If you've seen his name in print, it's really, really hard to see how it actually would be pronounced as Csikszentmihalyi, but that is the pronunciation there. And what he has studied almost for an additional 40 years as well, is how sort of perceived challenges or opportunities for action that really stretch our personal skills produce what he calls flow, or the flow state. So we really look at how do we have sort of optimal momentary experiences. Probably one of the most obvious ways to do that is to experience flow. So we take on challenges, we try and stretch ourselves to our sort of furthest skill set, but in doing that we also have to have these sort of clear goals that are relatively short term, so that we can get this immediate feedback, so that we can see sort of how well that we're doing. And so at least when you're in goal-directed behavior, Csikszentmihalyi would say that there's essentially 3 types of emotions that you're going to feel. You might feel smaller variants of these, and there's other ways to think about all the emotions that you would feel during momentary experiences. But basically, the 3 emotions you can feel during goal-directed behavior is flow, and this is where whatever you're challenging yourself to do, whatever goal-directed behavior you're doing, is really matched by the skill sets that you actually have. You can feel bored, and this is essentially where the challenges were just not hard enough, or at least relative to your skill set, right? So if you go to a job and you've been trained by some of the best of the best to do incredible work, and now you're asked to do really menial work. One of the most typical emotions that people will say that they experience is boredom. And then, of course, sometimes you go into situations where the demands really sort of exceed your abilities, right? So you feel anxiety, right? All of this is sort of displayed by this this diagram here, which really shows us where we are on this ratio of sort of challenges to skills and the types of emotions that we'd experience. And I actually showed something similar to this in an earlier section when we were talking a little bit about sort of day-to-day life. So what I love about flow is that there's a couple of things that are really important into it, and that one of the most important characteristics of flow is that you have this sort of distortion of temporal experience, and what I mean by that is it seems like just time flies by. If you're really absorbed in a task and you're really in this sort of state of flow, what you'll find is that there's sort of this loss of self-consciousness, and that you don't see any of the distractions that are around you. You spend your time sort of absorbed in an activity, and you just don't know where the time goes. And if you sort of see that white middle section of the graph, you can see that those two purple dots are really a person whose capabilities are really matched well with their challenges. However, what you can also see is that, for example, if you move across the x-axis and your skills or capabilities increase, but you don't increase in your challenge, you're going to become bored. And so what happens is you go from the purple dot to the yellow dot, and you become bored. And if you were to find yourself in that situation, the obvious advice is to increase the challenge so that you are going to feel flow. If you're going from the purple dot to the green dot, what you're really finding is that your skills or capabilities aren't actually increasing, but you're feeling that the challenges are increasing too quickly, and so the only way that you're going to feel flow is to increase your skill set. And so, in situations like this where, if you were to play a sport like basketball, you might find that if you're playing with, people who don't play very well, you'll be very bored. And if you're playing with people who are much better than you, you're going to feel really anxious. And so the best way to do that is to play with someone who has a little bit more skill than you, to sort of just push you into that sort of flow-like experience. So again, when we sort of consider the qualities of the flow state, the variable of interest that we're really that we're going to think about is how absorbed you are in the task. And often in experience sampling studies where they do these sort of day-to-day, moment-to-moment types of assessments, what they'll really find is when they ask people, how much did you feel absorbed in the activity that you were engaging in, that when a person's momentary experience is actually going to be sort of matched with just slightly above the their person's average level of their skill, that's when you really find sort of this sense of flow. Finally, Csikszentmihalyi talked about certain individuals who are maybe a little bit more intrinsically motivated to do things that are highly challenging, and also have high skill sets. Someone who really enjoys life, or at least does things for their own sake, and he called this autotelic personality. And it's a cluster of personality variables that are help a person experience a flow very easily. So if you feel curious and you're persistent in your task, and then these are the sort of personality characteristics that you need to sort of intrinsically put you in a situation where you're going to feel flow. The autotelic personality individuals tend to experience very little stress when they're in the flow quadrant, because they're a little bit more well matched with that type of optimal experience. Lastly, there is some cultural differences in flow. If you look back at that chart, very Western sort of idea. So Csikszentmihalyi found that Chinese students in Hong Kong actually experienced more flow when their skill set was higher than their challenge. Japanese students were experiencing more flow in situations that were highly challenging, but in situations they also had really, really highly skilled situations. So the sort of low challenge, low skill set didn't produce as much flow in Japanese college students. So there's some ways that you can actually try and foster flow. The book talks a lot about that. And that's the end of this lecture.